Hey everyone, welcome back to another tutorial after a long time. In this tutorial, we're going to create an AI UI generator using Next.js and the Gemini API from scratch. Let me show you a quick demo. Like I said, it is very similar to the V0 product by Vercel, which allows you to generate UI with a simple prompt. So you can write a prompt such as create a newsletter section for your website, and then you can just enter. And it will take a few seconds, make some API calls, and it will generate the code and render it for you. Now, it doesn't look very good because the CSS is not rendered properly. But if you copy this code by clicking on the copy code button and paste it somewhere else, then when the CSS is rendered, it looks much better and it is very much usable. So I'm still trying to figure this part out. When you click on the refresh button, it is supposed to refresh or re-render the CSS. I haven't figured that part out yet, but right now I think it is still pretty usable. And so we are going to create this application from scratch. Alright, so we will start by creating a new Next.js project. So we'll just write npx create next app. I'm using 13.4 UI Generator. I will name this project as UI Generator. I will change the directory to UI Generator. And I will run npm run dev to see if it's running properly or not. Alright, so the application is running fine. We will remove everything here inside the main div. Alright, so we have removed everything on the main div, and now we have an empty canvas to create anything we want. You know what I'm going to do? Instead of writing the code for it from scratch, I'm just going to use my UI generator to generate the UI, the basic UI for this application. Yeah, I'm doing a very Inception type thing. I'm the Christopher Nolan of coding tutorials. So let's go. I'll just write. Alright, so let's create this part, okay? This part of the UI, let's just write a prompt to generate this. Alright, so create a search box with a button attached to it which says go, okay? And a heading above it which says UI generator. A button below which says copy code. A blue button below. It says copy code. Okay. So I'll just paste it in here. Okay. I'm going to format document. Good. So let's see how it looks. We need to edit some CSS. I don't want this to be in the center like this. Let's just remove the outer div in the code that we generated. Okay. And to format document. Alright. Let's see how it looks. It looks decent. Now I want this to be at the center. So I'll just say, instead of justify between, in this div, I will write justify center. Okay. Alright, so now it's at the center, exactly what we wanted. The UI is pretty decent. We didn't have to write any code, we just generated it and now we're going to use it. To get the Gemini API key for free, just go to ai.google.dev. And here you can easily create an API key just by clicking on create API key and then selecting your project, Google Cloud project, and if you don't have one, create one, and then you'll be able to obtain the API key very easily. Copy the API key and then go to your root directory, and if there is not a .env file, then you have to create a .env file, new file, .env, where you will store all your environment variables. And I will create a new environment variable, Gemini API Key, and just paste it here. Okay. I'm not going to show you my API key, but after you have obtained your API key, just paste it here so you can use it. Okay. And so now what we will do is I will create a new API route. So to do that, I will create a new folder in that directory called API, and within that I will create a new folder called generate. Okay, and within generate I will create a file called route.js. This is how routing works in the new app directory. So /API/generate route. The code for /API/generate route is stored inside route.js file within the generate folder. Okay, so I will change the directory to UI generator first, and then I will install @google/GenerativeUI. Right, so fantastic, it is installed now in your application. Okay, so once that is done, I will import Google Generative AI from @google/generative AI, and then we'll import something called the next response. Okay, so we will create a handler function to handle post requests. Okay, to do that, just write export async function post, and we'll give two parameters, res and rec, which is request and response. So what this function will do is define what happens when a post request is made to this API endpoint, which is /generate, API/generate. Okay, const gen AI new Google Generative AI. This is just standard right. So this is how you can access the API key, which is stored in your .env file. Now I'll create a try catch block. So try, I will define a new variable, const model equals gen AI dot get generated model, and we will use the model Gemini Pro. Okay, and now we will store the request. All right, the request that you send to this API route, we will store that in a variable called data. So data equals await rec.json. So the request that is sent to this API route will be stored in a variable called data, which will be the prompt. Essentially we are sending the prompt in the request, right? In this post request we will be sending the prompt, and which will be stored in the variable called data, but we are not going to send this prompt directly to the Gemini API. Okay, we are going to do some prompt injections essentially. So I will add something to the prompt so that we have some control over what kind of output we get from the Gemini LLM, the AI. Okay, alright, so what we understood, that this variable data is essentially storing the prompt that we are going to be sending to this API route. Alright, but we're not going to directly send that prompt to Gemini. We will first add something to it, do some modifications, so that we have some control over the kind of output that we get from Gemini. So to do that, I will define a new variable called prompt. Alright, and it will be data.body, which is the prompt that the user enters plus few extra things. Alright, so I will write JSX code So this is essentially prompt engineering. Congratulations guys, you are prompt engineers now. And use Tailwind CSS. For modern UI, I'm just going to throw that word in so that it creates some nice UI interfaces. And don't make any imports, right? If it creates imports within the, you can't make imports within the return function of your React component, right? So that's why I'm writing don't make any imports. And lastly, only output code. So this prompt shall only output code. It's as simple as that. Alright. So we have added these things to the prompt. It will write JSX code, it will use Tailwind CSS, it will not make any imports, and it will only output code. Alright. This prompt is what we're going to send to the Gemini API. Alright. So I'll just write const result equals await model.generate generate content. I'm going to pass the prompt. That's how simple it is to use the Gemini API. Okay. And the output that we get, we are going to store that in a variable called code. So code equals await result.response dot text. Okay. And once we have obtained the code, which is the generated text from Gemini, we're going to send that as a response back to our applications. Okay. So I will just write return next response dot JSON code as code. Now we're going to write a catch statement. So if there is any error, we can console log that. Console log dot error. Okay. So that's it. We have created our API route, and this should work properly, hopefully, right? So now that we have written a function to handle post requests in our API route, we are going to write a function that will send the post request to our /generator route and process the response. Okay. But before we do that, we need to define two state variables. First is prompt. Okay. Prompt, and the function set prompt equals use state. The default value will be a string, and another one code set code will be the function, again use state. Alright, so now we have defined two state variables which we are going to use. Now we have to write the function which will send the post request and process the response. Okay. So I will write a function called const handleGenerate. Okay. And it will be an async function. Okay. Let's try the try catch block. So try const response equals await fetch. We will fetch from the /API/generate route, and some properties that we set method as post, headers, so content type we will set as application/JSON. And body will set as the most important thing, JSON.stringify. body will be prompt. Now we'll define another variable data, which will be equal to await response.json. And if the response is okay, we will set the code as data.code, which is the state variable that we defined, right? And if the response is not okay, if it is some kind of error, then we will console log that error. Okay, now let's write the catch block. So if there is any error, again we'll console the error. Okay, so the handle generate function is ready. Now one more thing that we have to do is, in the input box we have to set the value as prompt. Okay, and we're going to set an on change listener. So every time the user changes the prompt, it will update the value of the prompt variable, right? So on change equals, we're going to use an arrow function, set prompt e.target.value, very standard stuff, right? Okay, not search for components. I will change the placeholder to simply be enter a prompt. Okay, and within this div, I will create another div, and it will display the code here, right? So we have defined the handle generate function. We need it to be executed whenever the button go is clicked, right? So I will set an on click listener here, on click, handle generate, right? We're good to go. We're not done yet. Of course, we're not done yet, and you will see why. Because when we use our application, is it running? Okay, where's the problem? Use state. Oh, okay. It says that use state only works in client components. So we simply have to mention here use client. Okay, and this should solve it. Didn't? Oh. Okay. Typo here. This should solve it. It did. Right. So try it out. Let's see if the API route is working correctly or not. So create a blue button which says copy code. And what happened? Let's check the console. Right, there's an error. It says no response is returned from the route handler. Alright, so I found out the error which was happening. There are two errors in particular. First is in the parameters of the post handler function. The order of the parameters matters. So the mistake here is that the rec is second and res is first. So we will just switch the order. So I will write rec comma res. Alright. And the second mistake was this part, the response part, the response property of the result object. Alright, so turns out that this response part is not immediately available to us. So we have to create another variable, const response, and await it, and use the await method. So result dot response. Okay, and then we will modify how we define the code variable, which will be await response dot text. All right. So this will solve the problem. Okay. Now let's test it out. Okay. Hopefully this will work. Create a button, simple prompt that says copy code. Red button, let's say. This should work. But will it? Alright. So as we can see, it displayed the code. So it's working. Okay. Our application is sending the prompt to our API endpoint /generate, and that API endpoint is sending the API request to Gemini API and getting the response back, getting the generated text in the form of code back. So we are able to obtain generated code from the Gemini API using our API endpoint. Alright. So the final thing, the final piece of the puzzle which is left is rendering this code, basically. For that, we are going to use a library called, let me open another terminal and change directly to UI Generator. So we will install a package, npm install. It's called HTML React Parser. Okay. So we will wait for it to get installed. Alright. Now, so we will import parse from HTML React Parser. Now we will simply use this function. Okay. So instead of writing code here, we will write parse code. Parse code. Okay. Oh, it's already working. As you can see, there is a copy code button with the CSS kind of rendered. Alright, so let's try a little bit more complicated component. So I will say create a pricing section for my website. Again, it is not rendering the CSS properly. Alright, so when you copy this code, we haven't written the function to copy the code yet. Let's just write it. Let's write a function to copy the code. Okay. So we write a function named handleCopy async, and let's write a try catch block. So try await navigator dot clipboard. That's how you access the clipboard. Dot write text. Okay. And what are we going to store in the clipboard? The code. Simple. And then we are going to trigger an alert called code copied to clipboard. Okay. And we are going to catch some errors. We have to catch the error and console log it. Alright. And now we'll set an on-click listener for the copy code button. Alright, so it works perfectly. So it copied the code. Now if you paste this somewhere else, let's say here, okay, and with the re-renders, you can see it looks better, than it looked before because it rendered the CSS properly. Alright, so that's it for this tutorial, and see you in the next one. Subscribe for more tutorials like this one.